Our next speaker leads an iconic organization that has been at the forefront of cultural change, driving for greater acceptance of the LGBT community. I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Kate Ellis, President and CEO of GLAAD. Sarah, great to see you again. I'm really grateful for this. And I just want to start out, you're kind of like Ghostbusters in my view. You know, when you need somebody, give you a call. Whether it was dealing with Hallmark and their refusal to run ads showing same-sex couples, or Pope Francis. Why don't we start with Pope Francis? Tell us what you did with Pope Francis, because I want to use this as a microcosm to show what you do in action.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this important virtual live. And I refer to us as storm chasers, right? Whatever is happening in the moment culturally, we get into the eye of that storm and make sure that LGBTQ people are represented fairly and accurately. That's our job. So whether or not it's a new pope, and they're speaking out, or they're not speaking out, we feel that they should be speaking out, we then come in and use our tactics and the media specifically to put pressure on them to be on the right side of history, to support the LGBTQ community. But with like a Hallmark, which was even in COVID, if you wanted to be even more recent, or Black Lives Matter, here we are in the month of June, the last day of June, our Pride Month, and the conversation is quickly and appropriately turned to Black Lives Matter, right? And so for us, it was really important that trans lives matter be a part of that conversation too, and that we also include Black Lives Matter in the June Pride platform. We have this marvelous platform to talk about the LGBTQ community, and we can't do that if we're not talking about what's going on in the world right now. Or the last storm, and it's still a storm, is COVID-19, right? And they're asking for blood donations. But gay men and bisexual men, or men who have sex with men, can't donate blood if they're sexually active for the past 12 months. And so we went to work with the FDA to get them to lower that, because it's based in discrimination. It's based in stigma. It's not based in science. So I love your Ghostbuster analogy. I think it's right on.
So when you sort of look at the terrain today, the sandbox you're in, and I remember attending a GLAAD dinner, I think decades ago. A friend of mine created Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place, and had one of the early gay characters, Darren Star, brought them on. And when you kind of looked at the scene then, there was just virtually no characters. How big is stereotyping and kind of demeaning depictions of anyone still a major problem?
Yeah, when we look at it, depends on what you're looking at.
I can't hear a thing.
It really depends. So we're looking at television. And when you look at television, we've seen great growth in streaming content, especially streaming content, because it's been a big driver, right? It doesn't have the same revenue model as television, so they have more room to try new characters and to test the water. So in TV and streaming content, we've seen a lot better representation. When you get to the big 7 studios and the wide release films, we're still seeing them lag behind. I am optimistic that in the near future, we're going to see even more, but it really does lag behind. And I think when you look at the big 7 studios, in terms of trans representation, 0 movies came out with trans representation. A community that is under siege right now, and has been for years and years. And I will say that there is a marvelous movie that just came out on Netflix called, the name Disclosure. Sorry, I had a moment. And that traces actually the past decades of media representation for the trans community, similar to the Celluloid Closet, which was traced gay representation in media and was done by the founder of GLAAD.
I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. I'm sure you were brilliant, and I'm sorry that I could not hear what your brilliant thing, but I'm glad our audience did. But let me move to a moment. I'm sure that we're just talking about a moment where we have many tidal waves hitting the country at the same time. You mentioned COVID. We've had, what we've seen. I'm a half a block away from Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. We have 44 million people officially unemployed in the country. And so we're at a point of high tension, and you're good at moments of high tension. What do you think the American public needs to do, who has resources, who may have privilege, to begin reaching and understanding and having empathy with those who don't?
That's a great question. I think this is a moment to look at it as an opportunity. This, I think, is the big reset, the opportunity we have to redesign, reimagine, and restructure our society as we know it and make it more fair and more equitable. And so what I say to people is, I always say, find what is passionate for you. Find what's interesting for you. It could be at the local level, it could be at the global level. And then invest your resources, whatever those resources are, and they're different for everyone. It could be time, it could be money, it could be thought leadership. So take what you have as a person and give that, and we will build back tomorrow in a much more powerful way. I think this has been a very devastating time. There's been a lot of loss, but a lot of growth does come out of a lot of loss. And so we have to take time to recognize why we're here, how we got here. This is not by accident, in my opinion. There were signs that were missed. There were things that weren't done along, whether or not you're talking about COVID-19 or you're talking about Black Lives Matter. There's 400 years of history of not fixing that properly and not putting that even in our history books properly, not teaching the next generation. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. There's no shortage of work in our big rebuild, but find what you're passionate about and apply to that. And if you want, reach out to GLAAD. We'd love to have you too. There's a lot of work still to be done in the LGBTQ community, especially for trans lives, especially for Black trans lives. We have an epidemic, a violent epidemic affecting our trans women and trans women of color specifically.
With Pete Buttigieg having been such a standout candidate on the Democratic side, and we're going to have Chasten, his spouse, on later in today's program, do you think something was achieved that will stay with us in terms of a gay candidate or an LGBT candidate running and seeming like that was a more normal thing? Or has that image of Pete Buttigieg running vanished from the national consciousness?
I don't think that ever vanishes. I think the first always sets the course, and then you see more come behind them. They usually are the person who starts to pave the way for the future. And so I think that was an enormous moment in our movement, and it will be followed by many more in the future. So it was a big deal.
When you talk about the Hallmark Channel, and I don't know if you discussed it when I couldn't hear, but I was interested in the fact that you did go after Hallmark. How do you think of the strategic soft points in that, the points of leverage that you have to move institutions? And I want to talk about this in a way where you can teach people who are listening, who are interested in social action, who are interested in change. What are the replicable things that you did when you took on Hallmark?
So I think first and foremost, what we do, and I appreciate that question because a lot does happen behind the scenes. First and foremost, what we do is we reach out to them. We want to extend a hand and have a conversation. It only becomes a media moment when the conversation is at a standstill and we can't seem to move it. And so there was a moment in those conversations where they said that they weren't going to reinstate the ad, that they were sticking with their guns. And it was at that moment that we felt like, and that we started a petition with our members who were signing up vigorously. A lot of people were speaking out about it, and we were getting calls from a lot of the media agencies, from the CNNs and the MSNBCs, to come and talk about this challenge. And so that is sort of the moment that you say, do you want to be on the right side of history here? Do you want to be the people who excluded LGBTQ people, or do you want to be the people who learned and moved? And they chose to learn and move, and I think that was really it was amazing that in 2020 we're still doing that. I mean, you think about this, you were just talking about the Supreme Court ruling, and 5 years ago this past Friday was marriage equality. And it's, I just want to put this is a community's dignity, their respect, that is consistently being debated at the Supreme Court level, whether or not my wife and I can get married, whether or not a bakery can serve us a cake, whether or not a job can fire me simply for being gay. This is being debated at the Supreme Court level, my humanity, my rights. And so when you put that into context, and then you have a Hallmark who is now pulling an ad showing two women, like my wife and I, getting married, and they're saying that is controversial. That's not controversial, that's love. So I think, thanks for that question. I think it's really important that we build context around these issues.
Well, I think one of the, the questions I have about the time we're in is about how we move the needle forward in a conscientious way. I mean, we've got you, and GLAAD is just an outstanding organization. We have the head of the Human Rights Campaign coming on, the head of the Trevor Project coming on. I love all these organizations. But sometimes progress is almost accidental. I'll remember the day when Joe Biden said, hey, we ought to have same-sex marriage. Or we just had Rajiv Shah on, and he got in, I mean, I don't think I'm violating anything here, but he got in a little bit of trouble in the Obama administration of being the first agency director to basically say no one would be discriminated against in his agency on the basis of sexual identity and LGBT status. And so he was ahead of his administration. And so I just want to kind of, one, give credit to those people who've kind of, accidentally tripped through the right door. But how good is the community, is our community at conscientiously pursuing this? Or do we need to have the accidental moments that just say, oops, I tripped the right way, and all of you have to come along?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, honestly. I don't think they're accidents. I think that sometimes somebody pushes and a door opens. And when you're an activist and you're an advocate, you're always pushing and you're always trying just to get on equal footing, I think what's interesting is when you look at, there's culture change and there's policy change. Culture change softens the ground. And so for years, we've looked at whether or not people accepted LGBTQ people in America based on one question, which was, are you for or against marriage equality? Well, that didn't mean that they felt comfortable living next to someone who was gay or having a trans kid on their kid's soccer team. And that's something we look at annually. We do a study called Accelerating Acceptance, which is available on our website. And we look at where acceptance levels are in America. And you can draw a line between policy movement and acceptance levels because you have to change culture first. You soften the ground and then the policy typically follows. It doesn't always happen that way. Like you said, there are accidents. Sometimes policy gets ahead of culture change. And that's always interesting because it causes quite a bit of tension. But I think that those things have to be working in sync. And I think our movement actually works really well together. The policymakers and we're the culture changers, we all are talking, we are trying to build a better tomorrow for our community.
And just finally, Sarah Kate, this has been a wonderful conversation. Let's see, how can I structure this in a fair way? Kellyanne Conway talks about the hidden voter. I'm interested in the hidden GOPer in these issues that is an ally. Representative Sharice Davids just talked about a number of Republican congressmen. I know tons of senators and congressmen on the Republican side of the aisle for which this is no issue. But as you deal with Congress and as you deal with particularly the Republican side of the aisle, how would you say the level of support for non-discrimination, anti-discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community is on, say, a percentage basis?
I think it's pretty high. I think the challenge is that it gets very politicized right now. And one of the biggest challenges for our community that we've been facing over the past 3 to 4 years is sort of trying to divide us within our own community, which we have not done at all, but really picking on our trans community. So I think in terms of like gay and lesbian and bi, you have a lot of support, but when you get down to trans issues, the trans community has been attacked from day one of this administration, and there haven't been that many people standing up for them on the right side of this. So I think that is a place that we're uniquely focused right now. And how do we help the trans community? How do we bring people's hearts and minds along for the trans communities, the same way we did for the lesbian and gay community?
Well, Sarah Kate Ellis, President and CEO of GLAAD, the Gays and Lesbians Against Defamation, great organization. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I hope you'll come back because I want to make this an annual deal. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much.